Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Benjamin James. He's the founder at 404 and Atlas. Benjamin, welcome to the show.
Cheers for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you're doing is actually really innovative and cool, but maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Florida,
Okay.
but I am fortunate enough to have US, UK, and Italian citizenship. So I also moved around quite a bit in my life.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So walk us through kind of maybe your upbringing, where you went to school, and then we'll dive into kind of your career and then what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I grew up primarily in the States and in Florida, and then I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the Keenan Flagler Business School there. And so my first career really focused on finance and strategy consulting. I did this
Okay.
in New York City and London for a couple of years. And I did find that to be pretty interesting because you end up jumping into situations where you have to change industries rather rapidly. You have to deal with clients who have personal relationships into what they're building, and at the same time deal with fixed and flexible parameters of how you're trying to optimize business decisions or financial metrics within those companies. But I think at the same time that probably wasn't the creative career that I was looking for. And I applied then to a master's degree of architecture in Vienna, which is where I'm speaking to you from.
Cool.
And I was very lucky, I think, actually, to get in. I'm a self-taught coder. I've always loved technology, and I didn't have an extensive design portfolio, but I did code some small architecture floor plan generators. And the studio that accepted me here at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna was led by a very famous American architect named Greg Lynn, who, amongst other things, is famous for introducing computation into design, into architecture design, some years ago. And so I think there was some connection there that helped me get accepted. And since then, I've really been focused on doing work at the intersection of design and tech. Before I founded the company, I was doing a lot of work for museums and galleries, doing a lot of stuff where you would build hybrid structures, some that had XR or AR, augmented reality or extended reality components. So you had these physical structures with digital components to them. I did work on an F1 track, was pretty interesting.
That's
So
cool.
used like telemetry data of cars as a way to influence some of the track design components there. Yeah, and that's basically what I was working on, and doing a lot of stuff with machine vision at the time. When about 4.5 years ago or so, I thought maybe there's something interesting about connecting machine vision with machine learning, and I started getting pretty deep into AI at that time, and that was really the foundation of then what would ultimately become the company that I started.
Okay, so how did you come up with the idea and what exactly is 404? And then kind of we'll dive into Atlas and maybe if you can tell it what's similar and different between the two companies?
Yeah, so both companies deal with 3D AI, and the foundation here came from the fact that I was working in the architecture industry, and oftentimes when you do an architecture competition, you'll have a very short deadline to submit your creative design proposal, and so you'll have hundreds of really interesting ideas or formal configurations of buildings or structures or spaces that you want to prototype, that you want to build, that you want to submit. But because 3D modeling is such a time intensive constraint here, you really only have enough time to mock up one or two or three of these, and then make a decision based off of that and go forward. So I was looking for a way to generate architecture in a creative way, so that you could, on the one hand, not be constrained by the amount of time it takes to manually build all of these assets or meshes, or buildings, but do it in a way that is more augmenting your creativity rather than just kind of processing a set of actions. And this was about 5 years ago or so. So there wasn't a public release of Midjourney or ChatGPT, and Gen AI was really not a very common thing at that time. There
Sure.
was a type of neural network called a generative adversarial network, or a GAN. And so I started playing around with these GANs and started training on floor plans of architecture and sections of architecture of famous architects that I found to be very inspiring, and trying to understand if I could conceptually synthesize this in 3D space. And anyway, it went through many series of experiments, and I was fortunate enough to build a prototype to generate 3D architectural forms based on some of these architects that I had found inspiring. With
Interesting.
this prototype, I then applied for funding. I was living in Vienna at the time, applied for funding from the European Union, and was fortunate enough to be successful with that application. So the founding of the company happened with the advent of that grant funding, and that grant funding specifically was targeted towards building what was then called, and I believe still is called, trustworthy AI applications. So at that time, the European Union had issued some high-level guidance for how to build how to build AI in a trustworthy way. Things like human agency and ownership, transparency of the data, diversity into the data sources that you use, this type of thing. And so that was what really kicked off the company.
Interesting. Okay. So you've kind of been at this before AI became kind of super popular, I would say, and kind of mainstream. So how's the company kind of evolved over the last number of years to what it is today? And then let's dive into kind of exactly how people can leverage the technology.
Yeah, so you're right. When we first started building this technology, it took so much explanation to people as to what we were doing here, because people didn't really understand the concept of using AI as a design partner to help you build new things.
Yeah.
We very early on found that there was a lot more traction in the gaming industry than there was in the
Ah,
architecture industry. So, for example, a game developer told us very early on, I design more buildings for a single game than an architecture office does in 10 years, and I don't have training as an architect. So that was for us a very early
interesting.
pivot point into the entertainment industries. Entertainment industries also do, I must say, have much larger budgets, which is, from a business perspective, a very big benefit compared to the architecture industry, especially at the concept design stages. And so we started building out these buildings for large open world maps and video games. We won a few awards as well. So we won, for example, the most innovative AI solution within game dev from the Cyber Valley AI Research
Oh,
Institute.
congrats, man. That's
And
huge.
yeah, it was really excellent for us as a company, because it put us on the map all of a sudden of like really high profile game developers, including Square Enix, which would later become both a customer and an investor in our company. And we started getting all these requests, not only to generate the buildings, but to generate everything between the buildings, the landscapes, the props, the nature. And so as a company, we just evolved into this all-purpose 3D world generation set of tools and technologies. And the goal is, and that's really where we are today. And the goal is really just how can we generate all of these worlds at scale, but in a way that's still kind of that core idea of like augmenting the intuition of the individual designer. So I think our founding sort of vision here is always about, okay, you still have the human in the center of this, but you do want to, right, like all the way back to when I was an individual trying to look at multiple architecture structures for a competition. You just want to make that creative process more efficient.
No, makes a lot of sense. So, how does like a gaming company actually leverage your technology and kind of get it into their game?
Yeah. So you can do it in a few ways. So we generate either based off of text inputs, or more commonly for professional game developers, they like to use image references. So
Right.
image references give you a certain level of control both on key features of the assets that you're building, or the style that you want. And that's really important for a game developer. So it's not just about that you want to generate, thousands of buildings for a city. It's that you want all those buildings to be both unique but stylistically consistent. So
Yeah,
usually the
interesting.
way we work with a game developer is they'll give us concept art or mood boards, or reference images, along with some technical constraints that they want to implement. And so that would involve things like the level of detail or the type of game engine that they're working in. And from that, we'll build them a generator that their team can ultimately run. So we don't actually generate the world for
Oh,
them. We
interesting.
give them a technology that plugs into their existing workflow, so they can run the tech themselves and just go ahead and create from there.
Okay, so like I'm building a game. I come to you. You like I work like how does the technology get from kind of mood boards to you guys building it back to me using it? Like, do I run it locally on my server? Does it run in the cloud? A little bit of both. And then once I'm using it, like, how do I work with or without you? Kind of because game development can take months to
Yeah.
many years, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways, but generally, once we give you the technology, you don't have to really work with us anymore. You now have the generation technology yourself, and
Okay.
depending on a little bit your level of comfort, you might want that to be an on-premises solution or a cloud solution. Either one is fine, but some companies, for privacy reasons, prefer the additional security of an on-prem solution. I think one
Right.
of the hesitations or the bottlenecks that we've had is oftentimes when you work with really large game development companies, these processes, as you know, they take years to do. There's a large amount of customization that has to go into the models that we build for these guys. They'll be trained on their proprietary data and art that their artists have created. There'll be very specific use cases. And because of that, we're able to create incredibly high quality 3D worlds, but it is still a very custom solution. And so that was the business that we were building out with Atlas. But we kept getting these requests from, I'll call them just more amateur game developers, really creative people that didn't necessarily know how to 3D model at a professional level, but wanted to make also games, wanted to make huge worlds, wanted to even make some really strange, interesting use cases like films or digital twins and things like this. And so we made a second brand called 404. And the goal of 404 was, okay, at Atlas, we've built some really clever closed source technology that works very well for hyper custom solutions. Can we leverage that same knowledge to build an open source component that anybody can use? And maybe it's not quite as customized or hyper specific to high quality game development, but it's much more available and accessible to anybody. And so we've actually been treating 404 in a sense a little bit like a research arm, and
Mm.
we give that out for free to anybody who wants to use it. And we've seen people making just some unbelievable virtual worlds with that technology. It's all open source. It actually runs on even a crypto network. So we incentivize with blockchain people to build with it, and I think that's for us a very interesting project these days because it targets a little bit more of a broader. Sometimes they're called the next gen content creators, people that don't have the same skill set, but still you want somehow to democratize that content creation process.
Interesting. Okay, I want to dive a little bit deeper. How does like how does that play into crypto and kind of blockchain? Like walk us through that whole thing.
Yeah, so I think the partnership there that makes sense is when you deal with open source models.
Yeah.
So open source is incredible because open source moves so quickly and everybody builds on top of everybody else. And at the same time, what blockchain is very good about is tracking ownership and authenticity through these different projects or iterations on chain. So to me, the combination of open source AI and blockchain is a very good conceptual fit, and that's what we've tried to lean into a little bit in that project. And so, yeah, basically we work through a network called BitTensor. This maybe gets a little bit too specific, but we have a subnet on BitTensor, and miners, they're called, the people who use open source models, are essentially paid for performance in order to lend their compute to generate these models. And the tech that we've developed
Oh,
as
interesting.
404 and made open source is, how do you tell in real time, in like a competition setting, what is the best model? So for example, imagine that you want a red axe for your game, and two miners have competed, and one is given a red axe of medium quality, and the other one is given a red sword of super high quality. How do you determine which of these models should be returned to the user? And that's basically some of the technology that we've built. How do you weight how similar it is to what the user was asking? How do you determine quality in the sense of, well, there's aesthetic components to that, there's structural components to that, there's texture components to that. And I think this is very interesting because there are metrics that the industry uses that are fairly robust, but we've actually been using a lot of these new multimodal models, so like visual language models, to basically make comparisons and really tease out nuances for real-time evaluation of 3D models.
Okay, no, this is actually really interesting. So, how technical does the user of the tech need to be? Because the second you say like blockchain, Bitcoin, like sometimes that stuff can get really complicated really fast. So,
Yeah,
as a game developer, I might understand that. I might not understand that. I might understand kind of parts of that.
yeah.
So, walk us through kind of how that works and how do I actually leverage the 404 technology?
You don't have to know, as a user, you don't need to know any of that. So
Okay.
you could simply go to our website, describe the game asset that you're looking for, and within 60 seconds, you'd have a 3D model of it ready to use, with full commercial viability that you can go implement. We're currently building out a lot more implementation. So we have, for example, plugins to existing workflows. So maybe you don't want to generate this on the internet. Maybe you want to generate it in Blender, for example, an open source
Right.
3D modeling software. This is the kind of stuff that we're building out for the community.
Right. Yeah. I guess like for obvious reasons, you wouldn't want to just generate it in online live, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, some people do, but it just means that you're still a step away from your workflow. I think, sometimes, for example, we've seen people using the online generation tools because they want to make 3D content for websites. And then you have it there ready to put into Spline or some other program that allows you to embed 3D content into websites. But for game developers and filmmakers, oftentimes having it already in the workflow without import export is just a step of convenience.
Yeah. No, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, like, how are you? Okay, well, Atlas is obviously simple to monetize because you're just charging companies for it, right? And they
That's
probably
right.
pay like a subscription fee or something every year, and then you roll them out updates, I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. But then how do you monetize 404 then?
So 404 is using this crypto business model where essentially you have a platform called BitTensor, and BitTensor is the combination of multiple different, they're called subnets, but they're all essentially AI intelligence markets aimed at some different commodities. So we focus on 3D content creation. There are others that focus on inferencing or zero knowledge proofs or a wide variety, really nearly about any kind of AI native workflow that you could imagine. And the way that this works is there's three key actors in the ecosystem. There's the subnet owner. In the case of 404, that's us. There's
Okay.
the miners who are using their compute to do the work, let's say, the usable work that the subnet is trying to encourage. And there's the validators, basically somebody who checks the work for the user. So I'll use our subnet as a kind of clear example. If you go to our web app today and you write what you're looking for a wizard with a green robe holding a staff, something
Okay.
like that. That result now goes out to multiple miners who will compete to generate the best model for you. And so these miners are everybody from some people who just have very strong compute that they would like to dedicate towards this pursuit, and other people who are AI researchers who are building on top of and even
Ah,
beyond state of the art models for this. Now, if you win that competition, so if you submit the best wizard holding a staff, you gained some incentive through the cryptocurrency of this BitTensor network, as did the validator who had to check your work, as did we as the subnet owner. So one way you could think about it, I've heard this as an analogy before for a Web 2 audience, which I think is good. Think of it like a company that is paying kind of or incubating really creative internal projects with stock dividends, right? That's kind of
right.
what's happening here, except that you have this concept of marketplaces forming around each of these different subnets. So then you're able to trade these dividends, and there's market pricing set for them.
Interesting.
But
That's
it is
cool.
really interesting, I think, as a model, because essentially what you're able to do is you're able to add this incentive to building on open source, to kind of building in markets where commoditization is a component that may not always benefit you. And I think what we've seen, for example, with 404, which is interesting, is what you really incentivize are people that can iterate and build quickly. So, for example, if while we're having this conversation, um, NVIDIA or somebody releases a new development in the open source community that would improve the quality of your results, we expect to see that already implemented in our subnet within days, if not hours. And in a
Wow.
centralized system, that would be nearly impossible, right? It's just you have this kind of decentralized intelligence of the internet, or in this case of our miner network, that are looking for these ways to improve 3D AI in real time, and working with kind of changing trends. And I think that's a very interesting system.
Yeah, well, and it also offloads your infrastructure costs as well, right? Like there's no way you guys would be able to keep up with that as well. Like it would just be impossible.
Yeah, we could, but we'd be far less efficient with
Yeah,
our
yeah,
with our
okay, fair.
distribution of it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So I'm curious then, like, where do you see kind of the state of AI and how does it play into kind of, for lack of a better term for it, like kind of the job market? Like, is it
Yeah.
gonna, what do you see? What are you seeing? Because you're in the trenches building this stuff.
Well, I'll frame this that my view on this is somewhat specific to the creative industries. So this
Sure.
may not be applicable outside of that, but I think where AI provides a tremendous amount of value is actually in sort of expediting some of the very banal processes of being creative. Take,
100%.
for example, when you make a 3D asset, you have to UV map some of the faces of the mesh. No, that I know of, no creative individual really enjoys this process. It's very boring and time consuming. And so what AI should do is really take over those parts of the creative process that are inherently uncreative, to free up more creativity of the user. And at the same time, that's kind of doing two things. So one, it's making professional people who are currently professional creatives more efficient, more able to leverage where their true value is, which is in that sort of the creative design component, rather than necessarily some of the repetitive technical aspects. And for better or for worse, it's also lowering the barrier to come into those creative industries. So I think
Totally.
you will see more competition as a designer, because all of a sudden, a barrier to entry, which might have been you previously could digitally sculpt meshes, uh, is no longer applicable, and now people can use AI to handle some of those aspects. But at the same time, I think that's probably beneficial for the whole industry, because it just means that we're able to create a lot more creative content. And I also think that I'm a big believer that 3D is just or the creation of 3D assets is so fundamental for where we're going. When you see trends within XR, AR, VR,
Yeah.
when you see like the need for these virtual worlds to get more and more detailed, it was just leaked, I think, recently, that the budget for GTA 6 is $2 billion,
Which is
right?
wild, but yeah, like,
It's wild, and that's unsustainable as well, right? So
yeah,
there is this desire from all of us to have these incredibly creative, high fidelity, thousands upon thousands of assets in virtual worlds. And without new technology, we'll just never really be able to meet that demand. So I think in general, it's a positive for the whole industry, but it does mean that there will be a little bit of shift towards things that are inherently human centric creativity versus, let's say, repetitive and banal tasks.
No, I 100% agree with you. I'm curious then, because there's always this scare that AI is going to replace creativity. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts around that? And have you kind of seen that?
Yeah, so I mean, I fundamentally don't really agree with it. I can say that what I've seen is interesting. So let's say when we approach people with this type of technology, there's sort of one of three ways that a potential customer sees it. So the worst way, in a sense, is they see that they can save time and cost. There is an element of that, especially in really large companies where they say, okay, I have teams of thousands of people working on this project, and it's nearly impossible for me to manage this in any sort of efficient way. They see technology as a way to probably reduce that team size and still create the same amount of content more efficiently. In some cases, that can make sense, but that is one class of looking at this. That said, the other two classes I think are much more interesting. So mobile game developers typically see time to market as a key factor here. So they don't really see the efficiency in terms of cost reduction, but they see the efficiency in time
Yeah.
reduction. So can they iterate much faster? Can they do A/B testing with more users? Can they get their designs or their games or their worlds in front of customers quicker? And I think that's very interesting. And my favorite case is, especially, and this applies to most smaller teams, is I've always had this idea for a huge open world game, for example, but
Okay.
I've never been able to achieve that because we simply don't have the budget, we simply don't have the team, we don't have the time. And so can I use technology to basically supercharge the existing resources that I have? And I think that's really cool. I think also, I mean, this is a little bit where, in my opinion, AI is going. You have now the glimpses of a new genre of AI native gaming, which could fundamentally also open up tons of new opportunities. So think of games where user generated content, or UGC, is being created at runtime during the game
Yeah,
by the
interesting.
users based on what they are looking for. You think of a map that never ends because it's just being generated as you reach the end of it. Or think of personalized games where your decisions are changing everything you see or how you interact in the world. And I think, these are all of a sudden previously never possible. So there's no game that ever embraced this because it just was technically impossible to do so. But with Gen AI, all of a sudden this becomes a possibility. And I think that's also where then, the next genre of gaming is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. It's interesting because like computers have been really good at taking something and then giving it back to you in like some other kind of form. But
Yeah.
computers aren't creative. Like and they're never going to be creative. We can like simulate it kind of, but
Yeah.
it's still that like if something can get you 60 or 80% or more and you just have to do the fun 20% and
Yeah.
you can build a lot more stuff and you leverage that technology. I don't think that you like creative fields aren't going to go away. You will have to adapt and
Oh,
change, but that's kind of what I've seen, right? And like to your point a few minutes ago, I've been doing a bunch of like using AI to actually code like my own startup ideas. So like not having to need a developer, and it probably applies to the gaming industry now because I've seen people do it with like Xcode, for example, if
yeah.
they're building a little iOS game, is you could leverage AI to write the code and generate the assets to build your own game. And you don't have to really be a game designer or developer to kind of piece this stuff all together nowadays because the barrier to entry is so much lower. It might not be perfect, it might not be like a GTA type thing, but it doesn't need to be in a lot of cases.
No, exactly. And the as you note, to be perfect, you'll need a human there to polish it off and finish it
100%.
off and make those small bespoke but fundamentally important adjustments that an AI will never come up with. I do think the other thing that's interesting about AI tooling such as that we're building is for a creative that uses it, I think one of the first things you realize and why it's both so fun and so frightening is they're inherently indeterministic tools. So previously, if you wanted to do a design tool, you knew exactly what it was going to do. You know, if you have a point A and a
Yeah.
point B, it's going to draw a straight line between A and B. What AI is doing is saying, okay, my goal is to get to B, but how I get there, I will figure it out myself, and you get surprising results along the way that hopefully do spark some new thoughts from the human designer at the center of this. But I think that's a really key difference between AI design tools and the design tools that preceded them.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because you're right. Like sometimes that just happens to happen. Like you move something by accident or you like delete a layer and you're like, oh, that's actually better. Like,
Right.
right. And so like AI does give you that because there's been times you're right. You're like generating something. You're like, oh, that's much better than what I had. And it's
Yeah,
wrong.
and then you go take it and make it better than the
Yeah.
AI did, right? It's not That's not the end state of this, but it is an interesting aspect of AI that doesn't come out in other design tools.
Yeah. No, it's actually quite fascinating because, yeah. So I'm curious then. And you don't have to talk necessarily about your product roadmap, but how do you decide what to implement next? Because that's got to be really, really challenging in itself because there's so many ways you could go.
Yeah, it is. So as a company, what we try to do is we try to always have one element of very forward-looking R&D taking place. So we are very interested in this kind of idea of AI native games at the moment, and we have R&D going not just internally but in partnership with industry leaders to think about what does the next generation of gaming look like when AI plays a key role in that. At the same time, we work with a lot of feedback from users. So I think that tends to be the way that we most commonly identify features. We put things out there, we let people play with it, try it out,
Yeah.
figure out, okay, people would like this at scale. People would like to use this integrated into pipelines. People would like this to transfer styles between different games and environments, things like this, and try to work with that as feedback for determining key features.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I, I'm I'm curious then. So you kind of mentioned earlier on that 404 is almost like your research arm of Atlas. So how does some of that stuff that you learn in 404 make it into Atlas and maybe kind of vice versa?
Yeah, I think the two are pretty symbiotic. So we'll learn, for example, through 404, what open source models are winning our competitions, and even sort of see pathways towards integrating those models and even 404 as a foundational technology layer into the Atlas side of stuff. At the same time, Atlas is pretty well established with industry professionals, everyone from AAA game developers to film companies to leaders with game engines. And so, can we expose these types of Web 2 or traditional game developers and industries to something like 404, which is operating on blockchain with open source technology, and kind of create this partnership and flywheel there? And I think so far we've seen that to be like a really nice symbiotic relationship between the two entities.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes some sense. So for people that are maybe looking to get into the gaming industry, what advice do you give to them? Because there's so many things you can do, ways you can get in. Like, what have you seen, or what advice do you give to people?
I think AI tools are really already today and especially in the future going to make that the creative ideas you have, the storytelling, the narrative, the visual aesthetic that you want to convey in a game, that becomes the key criteria. And so I think whether you want to get into gaming because you have that really great idea for a new type of narrative or a new type of gameplay that might be, or a new visual language that might be very appealing to a game to build, that would be one thing. Or if you want to train yourself up to become a better game developer, I think this would be the area that you would focus on, because I think you can assume that some of these more technical skills, for sure, they're not going away anytime in the next year or two. But the industry is moving towards a world where creativity, in the creative industries, where creativity will be kind of your core competence, and things like technical skills will maybe be taken over by certain elements of automation or proceduralism or AI. And so I think, to me, the interesting thing is always when a game developer approaches us with a new idea for an aesthetic that we haven't seen in a game, or a new concept for level design that really hasn't come across our view at all. And I think that's where you see also breakout games are coming from. So
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious because, like, obviously, well, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here. It's like it seems like VR kind of has come and go on to be trendy over the last few years. You could kind of make the same argument about like AR. And I thought maybe Apple with the Vision Pro would actually kind of push it fully into the mainstream. And I know kind of the Meta Quest and some of the other VR AR headsets kind of are starting to gain some popularity. But like, where do you think we're kind of at with some of the augmented reality stuff? Because the technology finally kind of seems to be there, and that I actually think like it might really kind of explode over the next few years. Or what are your thoughts around that?
yeah, I mean, before I founded the company, I was doing a lot of work in the AR XR space, and it is really interesting to see the Vision Pro come out, and I the technology has made huge strides in some things that are kind of fundamental, like tracking of objects and spaces, so that it seems more stable, to higher quality of rendering in real time and things like this. But it doesn't seem like it's taken off yet, to me at least. And I'm also kind of optimistically of the view that you suggest, where sometimes you see in these design fields that it takes a long time, and the second there's a breakout success, everybody else follows very, very quickly. And so
Yeah, true.
I think, to some extent, XR and AR and wearables within XR and AR are waiting for that breakout success. And some people, myself included, were kind of optimistic. Maybe that would be Apple Vision Pro. Doesn't seem like that has been the case yet.
Yeah.
But I do think that everybody, or the big tech companies, see this as a huge area for development and future growth. So I suspect people will keep trying, and somebody will eventually crack it. And I think once one cracks it, we'll see people move very quickly as that becomes normal standard and people become much more comfortable with it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you find that a lot of people, just from your kind of data, are building for more of the VR AR headsets? Or are they still building kind of for the traditional kind of gaming on a computer and or consoles or mobile?
Well, so with Atlas, we do tend to focus on highly detailed, super high quality assets, which don't lend themselves well to XR devices. So on
Sure.
the Atlas side of stuff, we don't really see much of that.
Okay.
On the 404 side of stuff, actually, we do see quite a lot of people working on this. 404 generates something called Gaussian splats, which is a new form of 3D representation. So your traditional form of representation would be meshes. Now you can convert a Gaussian splat into a mesh, so that's fine for most game developers. But Gaussian splats are pretty interesting because they are much lighter weight. So they're used a lot in reconstruction or digital twins, for example, like scanning. They're akin to point clouds with a little bit more data in them. And I think this is an area where actually we do see a lot of interest in the XR space,
Okay.
even with applications that you might not expect. So think of like training simulations for
Ah,
for use cases that are not maybe the first creative industry use case that you would think about. And so we do see some use cases there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I guess like majority of the big game developers are building for consoles or computers or both, right? Yeah, okay. Interesting. So, I'm curious, like, do you have any other kind of thoughts or predictions of where you think AI is kind of gonna go? Do you think we're gonna get the like artificial intelligence, actual intelligence, or like what have you been seeing that maybe like try to demystify a little bit where we are and because AI seems to be very like hyped and overpromised right now, and then you kind of bring
Yeah.
it back down to where it is in reality.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so I think we don't deal so much with any language model training, which is where a lot of
Right.
the ideas of AGI are coming out. I think the stuff that gets us excited is the multimodal stuff. So
Ah,
where you
yeah.
combine a language model with a vision model, for example, so it could look at a mesh and give you back information, which could then be fed into an image generator model, for example,
Right.
and this kind of synergy between the different models. Although I don't think this is really on any sort of path towards AGI. I just think this is a more intelligent and interesting way for a designer to work with 3D information, because you're able to dispel it into sort of multiple views, 3D view, 2D view, descriptions, and things of the like. I will say that I think AI is both overhyped at the moment, and also probably we don't actually really realize the broader long-term potentials of it. So
Yeah.
the example I quite like is when television was invented. I don't know if you know what the first TV broadcasts were.
No, I don't think I do. What was it?
It it was filming people reading the radio. Because
Oh,
the
yeah.
first thought we
Interesting.
had was, this is an entirely new technology and medium. We'll just apply it to the old way that we thought about things. And I think
Right.
there is an element of that in AI today. Can it do this faster? Yes. Can it improve this process? Yes. But in 5, 10, 20 years, I suspect, or I hope, that at least within gaming or the creative industries, the way that AI is being used is almost unfathomable today. And we're
Yeah.
trying, as at Atlas and 404, we're trying to do research into this. We're trying to think of what does AI native gaming look like and what are applications. But even this is still within a framing of the world that we kind of know. And so I just think that it is this strange situation where it is both overhyped, and yet at the same time the sort of the longer term potential here is probably difficult to fully understand.
Yeah, no, that's actually like a really good way of putting it because like I use it all day every day, but to your point
Yeah,
it's like I'm just kind of scratching the surface with it because it's really good at generating simple things right now and even if it gets you 60 or 80% of the way into something, that's
right.
great. But you're right. In 5, 10, 20 years, who knows where we're gonna be with it and what it's gonna do, which devices, like physical devices, it's gonna be in or not in, right? Like who knows?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
No, that's actually really interesting. So we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself, 404, Atlas, and any other links you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think if anybody is interested in touching 3D AI, they should go to 404 as a good starting point. So the website there is 404.xyz, and that's a good place. You can generate models already and see what they look like and understand a little bit what this workflow entails. And if that's of interest, then you want to maybe take it to a step that's slightly more professional, then you could go to atlas.design, which is the website for the other brand Atlas, and that works more with larger studios and in Web 2 professional settings. But I think also people are always welcome to reach out. My contact information is on those sites, and I always enjoy talking about these things. And I always enjoy speaking to people that have interesting ideas for games or films or virtual worlds. And if we can be helpful through either brand, I would be happy to.
Perfect, Benjamin. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening. please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.